you run, and to run is to do the next thing, is to put your foot in front of your next, and to keep your eyes focused on the goal, which is Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And I'm not going to sit down. Okay, so I'm going to look at two history makers. Because I'm me, they're always going to be women. Ladies that know me know they're always going to be the women in the Bible. And I'm going to look at Rahab and Ruth. Okay, now, in characteristics, these two are incredibly different women. Their personalities are different, their stories are very different. But I want to suggest to you that in their doing the next thing, they altered history. I'll come to it, but they changed the trajectory simply by doing the thing that came naturally to them. So I'll start with the story of Rahab. So Rahab was a prostitute, a Canaanite woman who lived in the promised land. So she lived in Jericho. I'm going to say now, Rahab was a prostitute, but I'm not focusing on her morality, because sometimes when we talk about Rahab, we're very concerned about Rahab's morality, and actually her activity gets lost. So yes, she was a prostitute, but she was a Canaanite woman. There's suggestions that she kept an inn, so she kept a place that was the hub of the community. And her practice in Canaan was an accepted practice, because these weren't the people of God. So she was a woman who lived in the walls of Jericho, and Joshua sent the spies into the land. You can read the details in Joshua 2 and Joshua 6, but I'm going to précis it just for the purpose of time. And so she lived in the walls of Jericho, and the spies came to where she lived. So it says in the Bible they came to her house, poetic license. They came to the hub that she ran, And what's really interesting with Rahab is then as soon as they come in, she immediately knows what needs to be done. And when the king sends the men out to come and find the spies, she immediately says, yeah, they were here, but they've gone now. And they've gone into the walls, and she sends off the king's men, which keeps the spies safe. And then can you go back to the other slide before that? Thanks, cool. Not there yet. So she sends them off, and then with the spies, she pleads for her family's life, and she says to them, swear that you will give my family safety, because we know what's coming. We know that your God is about to hand over this land to you. We are in fear of our lives. Swear to me that you will save my family. And so she makes a kind of covenant with these spies that she should have a red cord that is hung out of her window. And then when the walls of Jericho eventually fell, her family were the only family. Joshua clearly says, only Rahab shall be spared, only Rahab and her family. So they were the only family that was spared in the land of Canaan and essentially were given freedom. So if anybody else had been captured in that moment, only Rahab and her family were given freedom. So that was Rahab. We'll explore it more. Then you have Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite woman. In fact, both of these were young women. So Ruth is a Moabite young woman who's living in a time of famine. And in that time of famine, her husband dies, and she is left with her mother-in-law, Naomi. And Naomi says to Ruth and her sister-in-law, go back to your families, because Naomi understands that if you go back to your families, you will be looked after, you will have food, you will have provision. If you're with me, I can't give you that, because I'm female and I'm about to go back to a land that I don't know if I will be accepted in, and I certainly don't have any land there. And Ruth pleads with Naomi, and she makes a covenant with her that I will stay with you. I'm not going anywhere, I'm staying with you. And she commits her life to Naomi. She travels to the place where Naomi's from. I think it's Bethlehem. I need to check that. And she goes back, and then she gleans the land. And essentially what she does is she kind of gathers up. She makes a decision that to provide for Naomi, she will gather up what is left over in the fields. And then the story continues to the point where she obeys Naomi and does all of the things that Naomi asks her to do, and then is redeemed by the kinsman redeemer, Boaz. And that then restores back to Naomi and to Ruth all of the things that they lost in the death of their family and their husbands. Are you with me? That's the stories. Okay. So here are two young women who are not of the people of Israel. They are not the people of God. So they are Gentiles. Okay. So hold that, remembering that you, unless you have Jewish heritage, are considered a Gentile. Okay. So these two women were hindered history makers. There's nothing in their makeup, in their positioning, in their heritage, that would consider that they would ever be a part of God's plan or ever be a part of God's eternal trajectory of the restoration of mankind back to God. There's nothing to suggest that. Both of them were young. Both of them were female. So, as much as we say there are challenges being a woman now, in those days they had no rights, no land, no ability to have any power over themselves. So essentially, even in that moment, they cannot have any active participation in law, decision-making. So how on earth can they change history? Rahab was a Canaanite, so absolutely opposed to the people of Israel, the complete enemy, the intended people that they're going to defeat. Ruth is a Moabite, so she's somebody that the people of Israel had always been against. They'd had historical offences with them, and they just were never aligned. Rahab, a prostitute, so according to the people of Israel, immoral. Ruth, a widow and childless, nothing of note. She didn't have a husband. She didn't have any children. Rahab was living in fear. She says that we are melting in fear because we know what's about to come. Ruth is in famine, so she's physically weak. Rahab lives in direct threat every day. When he says when she's in direct threat because of the job that she does. When men come to that place, they're not coming to keep her safe or to look after her. And Ruth had no protection and no land. So how on earth are these two women supposed to change history? And if we look at ourselves, there are so many things sometimes in our lives that we just think, there is no way right now when you're asking me to do these great things for God, because we all understand that the purposes of God are greatness. And we are a church that prays for revival. We don't want to just be the only people in this room. We want those doors open. We want people coming in. We want to be a church revived. But sometimes our circumstances and the people that we are, our personalities, the situations around us, make us feel like there is absolutely no way that I can be an instrument for revival, or I can be an instrument to impact my community. You've got no chance. And I would say Rahab and Ruth would say the same. But there were some really important things that Rahab and Ruth both did. So in Joshua 2, verse 9 and 11, Rahab, again, remember, she's a Canaanite. So this isn't somebody who has encountered God. She hasn't had the experience of the people of Israel. She hasn't, seen Moses come down and had that as part of her heritage and seen all of the miracles that God has done. She's not heard of those stories apart from secondhand within this hub of the community. So she's secondhand heard stories that, they were fed when they were in the wilderness, and he parted the Red Seas, and she's got all of these stories, and all of those stories bring her to the point where she says, I know that the Lord is giving you this land. So essentially, I surrender. In this moment, me, in front of you two spies, men of God, I surrender. I know God's giving you this land because your God is the God in heaven and on earth. So that first moment, and it's so easy for us, that acceptance where we say, God, I surrender. I know that you are the God of heaven and of earth, and I surrender. Hands up. And surrender sometimes means I give everything that I am over to you. Surrender sometimes means I wave the white flag. You've been after me for years. I've known you. You've been pursuing me. All right, I surrender. I give up. You can have my heart. And Ruth does exactly the same thing. So as a Moabite, when she says to Naomi, I'm leaving it behind, I'm coming with you, it is a commitment to Naomi, and it is a kind of familial commitment. She's saying, as my mother-in-law, I hand myself over to you. But she's also saying, all of my heritage, all of my religion, all of my past, all the things I've known about different gods, because both of them came from gods where they had many gods, not just one God. She says, I surrender all of that now. Your God will be my God. I commit my life to your God. So that's the first thing they did. They made a recognition of God, and that recognition affected their decisions. The next thing that they did that wasn't very good English. They were obedient to what was required of them. So Rahab agreed and so they said to her, this is the thing you must do. And it seemed so, for us, you would read it and think that's so insignificant. Why insignificant? Why a red cord out of a window? Now we know history. Now we know the thread of the red cord and how it, is completed in the death of Jesus and the blood of Jesus. We know that now. We're thousands of years on. Rahab had it doesn't give us any real understanding of Rahab thinking, I know why you've said red cord. Yep, got you. But she just said, agreed. Yep, let it be so, because I want my family to be saved. I believe your God is my God. So, yep, that's no problem. And so she did exactly what was asked of her. And Ruth, in the same way, she said to Naomi, I will do whatever you say. She was given an instruction. She said, I will do whatever you say. And it may not have made any sense to her, but that she just did it diligently, obediently. She just went and did that thing. And there are so many times in our lives where God says, do that, don't do that, wait there, hold back. And we kind of go, I know, but Lord. And, and I've said before about the faith and works, and we try and we strategize it, and we say, but Lord, I will do that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the 30% of what you said, because I've probably got a better idea. I know you made the whole heavens and the earth, but just in a minute, hang on. But that purity of obedience, that when God says, when you are given an instruction by the God who made the universe, when the Holy Spirit gives you that check, and that obedient step of saying, I will do whatever you ask me to do. Yep, I'll do it through and through. I don't understand it. I don't know where it's going to go, but I will just do the next thing that you've asked me to do. And one of the most important things that they both did, which I love, like when I read stories, obviously I've got a thing about the women in the Bible, but when I read stories of women in the Bible, I'm always moved because they feel so human. And they feel so female when I read them. Like, I really know why they made the decision they made. And in Rahab's case, she applied her inherent strength for a divine purpose. So Rahab was courageous. Two men who she had never met before came into her place of safety, and she hid them. Straight away, she knew what she needed to do because she was naturally courageous. She couldn't do the job she did without courage. So she was naturally courageous. So immediately she took them, she hid them, and she's confronted with the king's men, soldiers. These aren't, little tiny men knocking on the door asking, I don't suppose you've got any spies have you? No. These are big men demanding that she brings out the men who she's hidden. And she says, oh yes, the men came to see me, but I don't know where they come from. But yeah, it was close to the gate. They've left. I don't know where they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. That took such great courage for her to do that, because actually she could have easily said, they're in there. Take them. They're in there. Get this away from my door. I don't want any trouble. I'll just, go for it. But she didn't. For some reason, she used courage. And she kind of set her face and stood in front of, remember, young woman. So picture somebody small, standing up to these two men saying, yes, no, they've gone, you need to go and chase after them. She also used the fact that she was the nexus of this community. So this is why I say about the morality. I know she was a prostitute. I know that is an immoral in the eyes of God, that is immoral. But she used that to her advantage, because if she does the job she does and she's keeping it in, people are coming in and out of that Canaanite men are coming in and out of that place, and they're talking amongst themselves about the Red Sea and the fact that these people they're surrounding these walls. They're walking. They think that something's going to happen. And she says that their hearts are melting in fear. So she's taken this information that she's got as the nexus of the community, and she's used it to her advantage because she's informed the spies, you have this land. Don't walk away. You have this land. And in doing that, she gives them the confidence to go back to Joshua and say, God has given us this land. It's Rahab's words that the spies use to inform Joshua that then gives them the confidence to do what they need to do. And Rahab was tenacious. She didn't just say, yes, I'll look after you. She then said, keep my family. Because she wanted her family safe. She knew what was coming, and she said, keep my family. And you'll see why it's so important that she kept that family line, why she kept them alive. But she was tenacious in it. She could have handed over to the spies and just done what they said she wanted to do, and then just, please just get out of here and just get away from my door. But she didn't. She was tenacious. Give me something for it. Keep me alive. Keep my family alive. But also in all of that, Rahab was honourable. She did the thing that they asked her to do. So there's this, I kind of see Rahab as this super, don't mess with Rahab kind of person, small but fierce. It says in Shakespeare, right? Though she be small, she is mighty. That's how I see Rahab. And if you recognise yourself in Rahab, all good. Then we have Ruth. And I see Ruth as small and mighty, but so gentle. And, we all know you might have friends called Ruth who have been given the name Ruth because of their gentleness. Or, just that softness or that kindness. And you really think, oh, yeah, you really suit the name Ruth. And Ruth was loyal. She was with her future looked bleak. She was about to go with Naomi as a Moabite woman to a place where she knew she wouldn't be accepted. And she knew that actually, it says where Boaz tells her where to go into the fields, he does it so that he can protect her because she's in physical threat as well as a young woman going into the fields. But she's so loyal to Naomi that she says, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. And this is like an inherent characteristic of Ruth, that she just is inherently loyal. So it makes sense to her to stay with Naomi. And Naomi kind of accepts that. You see this back and forth with Naomi and Ruth to the point that Naomi kind of gives in and says, look, I'm not going to win with you. This is who you are. Yes, okay, you can come with me. But also, I was going to call her practical, but I don't think she's practical. I think with Ruth, she just was courageous and she knew what needed to be done. So she knew that Naomi had to eat. She knew they had to eat. And she knew that the fields were a threatening place for her because the men would be at work and the women would then take what was left over on the threshing floor. And they were beaten by these men, because they were beggars, essentially. So they weren't seen as anything to be esteemed or to be looked upon. So she, again, was courageous. She just said to Naomi, let me go to the field and I'll go and glean. She was tenacious as well because they speak of Ruth and they say, she came and she has continued from early morning until now, until the evening, except for a short rest. And she was faithful. Boaz says to her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land, and you came to a people that you did not know before. So here are these two really different women. You've got Rahab, who's small and mighty. You've got Ruth, who's small and gentle and kind. And both of them took those characteristics, and unbeknownst to them, they have no idea how they are about to change history. But what they do is they just do the next thing. Rahab did the thing she needed to do to protect her family. Ruth did the thing she needed to do to protect Naomi and to get Naomi's land redeemed back to her. So they both understood their mission in the beginning. They knew what they had to do next. But they both made history by doing the next thing. And I'll come to how they made history. Probably you already know, but I'll come to how they've made history. So then I want to look at our lives and what the next thing might be for you or for me. Sometimes it's just the need that is the next thing. And when I say that, I mean it might be your need that is the next thing, that everything that is around you and that consumes you is just the only next thing you can do. For Rahab and for Ruth, the only thing that they could do was meet the need. Rahab had to keep her family safe. Ruth had to get provision for her family and the land back. And that was all that they could do. And sometime in our lives, the only thing we can do is meet this need in this moment and do this thing that is in front of me, because I don't have energy to do anything else. And you know what? Sometimes that is what God is calling you to do. Sometimes God is just saying, do the next thing. Just take the next step. You might be, people at the end of the marathon, we've all seen them, where the run doesn't feel so strong, it's not so determined, but it's still a run. And sometimes that's what God is asking you to do, to just simply do the next thing. And then sometimes God is asking you to do the next thing for the next person. Paul and I in our lives, we've been massively privileged because of Paul's work. He's had labourers throughout for as long as I've been with him, really. And each one of them has come into our lives and truly has come into our lives. We've always seen that, and not in a patronising way. We're not doing it as like a ministry, and I do that because, when it's kind of like, oh, I feel so great because I'm looking after these people. It's not that. They come into our lives and they transform our lives. They haven't often come from brilliant backgrounds but we are committed to each of them to do the next thing for them. Whether that's kind of, for Paul often it's like, get a driving lesson, like get yourself some transport. They're so practical. But I've said to Paul, I've seen the trajectory of their lives change. I can't say to you that any of them have, met with Jesus or become Christians, but they have always known that we are people of faith, that we do this thing because, we love God. But also we've told them our story of where we've come from and how God has impacted us and our lives and the provision for us. And I've seen them change. I've seen their dreams change, where some of them have sort of said, I haven't got any dreams. And all of a sudden, after a few weeks with Paul, I mean, genuinely, spend a few weeks with Paul, you'll have so many dreams, you'll think you can do anything. But a few weeks with Paul, and they're like, I'm gonna invest in property, and I'm going to buy a house, and and we're like, yep, you can absolutely do that. Yep, there's nothing telling you that you can't. And you suddenly see the trajectory change, and the only thing that we're doing is the next thing with them. And in my life, there have been so many people, some of them in this room, who have changed the trajectory of my life because of just doing the next thing. The person that brought my parents to the Lord, I see now where I've worked in social services. I see where I would have gone and the life we would have had. And I am so thankful for the person who brought my parents to God, because they changed the trajectory of me, my children, and my children's children. And all they did was the next thing. In a church in Kidderminster, they were just kind to my parents, who were 20 and 21, and they were just kind. Trudy, going to house group at Trudy's, and in a time where my life was massively turmoil, going to Trudy's, and I can't tell you, if you've ever visited Trudy's house, it's like the most peaceful place in the world. Going into Trudy's home and feeling safe, Paul and Lib, Murray and Ruth, like people that have just truly given me friendship. Jamie, a barn that was truly a barn, safety, no demands. There are loads of you, I can't name all of you, but just all you've done is you've done the next thing. You invited us for dinner, you laughed at a joke that was probably inappropriate, and then corrected me after, thanks very much. But you just have loved us, and you've just loved us. And doing the next thing, you've changed history. And even if you've only changed my history, that doesn't matter. You've changed my children's and their children's and their children's. So I would massively encourage you to meet the need. You know, we talk about revival and we talk about having people coming in through this. And I always say, it starts here. If you start meeting the need of each other, it says in the Bible, they will know you because you love each other. Because of how you love, they will know you. Because, you know, if people read about Jesus in the Bible, they read about a man who did the next thing and he met the next person and he just met their need. So they'll read that Bible and then they'll come to the church and they'll expect to see a church that does the same. And if they come to a church and they don't see the same, they're not going to stay in the church. They're not going to follow Jesus because they won't see the evidence in this time now. So that's when the need is the next thing, whether it's your need, whether it's reaching out to somebody and saying, I have a need, confident that that need will be met. Just meet the need. There are times, and I really believe we're in a time now where supplication is the next thing. So whilst we're meeting the need, 2 Chronicles 7:14 says, and I really believe what I see in the church right now, as a church globally, this is, I believe, what God is saying to his church right now, that if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. Right now as a church, it's a time for supplication where we start to seek God and we start to humble ourselves and pray and seek his face. We don't have time. We don't have time anymore. We've spent so long creating, and I'm talking globally, a church that looks like something. And it is time now that we humble ourselves, that we see ourselves as image bearers, but image bearers. His is the image. He is the one that we are focused on. Jesus is the one that we set our faces on. But what's so beautiful about supplication is that in Hebrews it says that we can approach God's throne of grace with confidence and that we will receive mercy and grace to help us in our time of need. That as a church we are in a time of need, and we're in a time of need in this church as well. This next step, you know, what we do next is a time of need. And God says to us, you can approach me confidently, have confidence. You know, it says in Ephesians 2, pray in all occasions. Supplication is the next thing. It is the next thing. So whilst we're meeting the needs of ourselves and of others and having this kind of reciprocal relationship where we're meeting each other's needs, also we need as a church, locally, globally, to be in a place of supplication where we humble ourselves and we pray. And then sometimes, in fact, all times, obedience is the next thing. It says in Corinthians, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. There's so much in this world that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. There's so much. You know, sometimes I'm overwhelmed by how much there is. But it's just the next thing. The next thought, take it captive, make it obedient. The next thing, take it captive, make it obedient. You know, some of us struggle with this same thing over and over and over again, and we go, I'm never going to conquer it. I'm never going to win over this sin. So I might as well just give into it. But God doesn't say to you, conquer it all. God says to you, every thought, granular, every thought, make it captive, make it obedient. Every tendency, every temptation, granular, make it captive, make it obedient to me, because it's in the cumulative effect of obedience. There's a cumulative effect of taking every thought captive. You make history by doing the next thing. And I can prove it. And I can prove it through Rahab and Ruth. And you might know where this is going. In Matthew 1 verse 5, we see the genealogy of Jesus. And here's what it says. Salmon, the father of Boaz. Boaz's mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed. Obed's mother was Ruth. These two women who had no place in the purposes of God. They were not of God's people. They positioned themselves by acknowledging God and having that affect their decisions, by being obedient to the thing that they were asked to do, and by using their characters for the purposes of God and applying those inherent characteristics that they had that many might have looked on and thought, weak, bit too strong. They applied those characteristics and they positioned themselves, or were positioned, into the genealogy of Christ. And I'll prove it further. It's really hard to see, but here's the thread. Here is the cord that runs through generations. So, Ruth and Rahab came before David. Then from King David, you have the offshoot of Joseph's line, which is described in Matthew, and Mary's line, which is described in Luke. And each of those, this is Joseph's line, so I won't go through all of them, but Rahab and Ruth are there. Then we have King David, whose son Solomon then leads the line to Joseph. Then on the next slide, we have Rahab and Ruth to King David, whose son Nathan, brother of Solomon, leads all the way to Mary. They changed history. We wouldn't have Jesus were it not for Rahab and Ruth. That's crazy to me. That these two women who had no position, literally had no position. Rahab had no land. Ruth had no land. They were both young. They were both female. Simply by doing the next thing, they changed history. And so I want to go back to that idea that they were hindered. So they hindered history makers. And there are so many things that hinder us in our lives. Self-perception. I'm probably not. Oh, you don't know where I've come from. Oh, you don't know my past. Oh, you don't know what I've done. Comparison. Well, she's much stronger than I am, and I'm quite a gentle person. Or I'm not as courageous as that person. Or your character. I'm a bit too loud. I'm too quiet. Oh, I'm too reactive. I'm not reactive enough. I'm too passive. Your social standing. I don't have any position. I can't do anything. I'm not a leader. I don't do anything of significance. Your age. I'm way too young. It's not for me yet. Wait till I'm older. Oh, I'm far too old. I'm past it. My time has passed. Your gender. Whether you're living in fear. Sometimes you're living in famine. Some of you live in threat. And what I mean sometimes is it's perceived threat. Like there isn't actually any threat direct in your life, but you live with a life of low-level threat all your life. And that's restrictive. You may feel unprotected. I wasn't going to say this, but I am going to say this. There are some women that come to church and they come on their own because whether their husbands aren't in the church or they don't have a husband or, for whatever reason, that feels sometimes an unprotected place because in the past, the covering or... So I want to say to you, if that is you, you are entirely, massively, 100% a history maker, an image bearer, entirely 100% here for the purposes of God. Okay? So I'm just going to say that. So before I finish, let's go to the revived church. What does the revived church look like? We're praying for a revival, yeah? We want a move of God. The revived church is not waiting for the ideal future or the next big event. we are constantly stepping forward. We actively respond to the next thing. We are not passive. We understand ourselves to be image bearers, purpose makers, doing the next thing, actively obedient to the call of the Holy Spirit in every minute, in every second, in every hour. We wake up every day saying, what today, God? In the most simple things, the giving somebody a fiver because God says, just give them a fiver. Listen, sometimes I'm talking to somebody, and because of how my brain works, I find it difficult to listen. My brain just goes, bzz, 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 bzz. And sometimes genuinely, the Holy Spirit will say to me, listen. And I have to go, okay, all right, listen. But because in that moment, he's saying, I want you to hear something, because if you don't listen, I won't be able to speak. So even that tiny, but take that thought captive, be obedient in that thought. The revived church has thrown off everything that hinders. All of those things that you can list about yourself. And I deliberately put those things over their faces because they were blockers to who you would perceive them to be. Let's throw them off. Actively, let's throw them off every day. Let's take those thoughts captive. Let's not let the enemy have any ground in our thought life about ourselves and how God can use us. Let's actively throw them off. Let's run. Let's go. I'm ready. Let's stop being passive. Let's start thinking, I'm running. For as long as I've got on this earth, I'm running. Because heaven's going to be great. But let's run. And let's fix our eyes on Jesus. Let's not be passive anymore. Let's not think that there are so many distractions in life. There is only one goal. And that is Jesus, the author, the person who started, the one who began, and the finisher, the one who will complete it all of our faith. That's me. So I'm going to pray, and then I'll ask the band to come back.